Kurtop here, and this is 100 archaeological excavations that changed our understanding of history. Bad news for believers. The Shroud of Turin is a linen cloth with an image of a human body and face. The earliest reliable references date back to the mid-14th century. The cloth is associated with the knight Geoffroy de Charny and the shows in Lear, Champagne. Even at that time, there was mistrust of it. The Bishop of Troyes called the image made by hand. In 1988 to 1989, linen samples were sent to 3 independent laboratories, Arizona, Oxford, Zurich, for radiocarbon analysis. The obtained interval was 1260 to 1390, that is, the same period when the shroud appears in sources. Popular objections were analyzed separately. The version of a patch made of later fabric, contamination after the fire of 1532, the influence of carbon monoxide, etc. The test did not provide convincing grounds for shifting the dating. Recently, another 14th century text was introduced into scientific circulation. French scientist Nicole Oresme, in a treatise on unusual phenomena, mentions the Lear shroud as an example of a forgery and suggests evaluating such cases by the usual criteria: independence of witnesses and agreement of descriptions with natural causes. This shows that a skeptical position already existed at the first shows. So what we have is that sources and laboratory data indicate the medieval origin of the canvas and the image. This does not cancel the cultural and religious significance of the object for believers, but within the framework of fact-checking, the conclusion is simple. According to the dating and documents, the shroud is a product of the Middle Ages, and it is certainly not 2,000 years old. Africa in Israel. In the south of Israel, in the Negev Desert, archaeologists have explored the Tel Malhada Hill, one of the places associated with the biblical city of Molada. Among the finds from the 6th century next to Christian burials, they discovered something unexpected: 5 hand-carved ebony figurines. The material is Scion ebony, which grows only in southern India and Sri Lanka. This in itself is a mystery, but the faces are most surprising. The figurines depict male and female torsos with expressive features, wide cheekbones, flattened noses, and a high forehead. Researchers are sure that these images have African features. On their heads are massive headdresses with holes made in them, possibly to wear the figurines as pendants or amulets. The burials themselves are Christian. Glass vessels, bronze and stone jewelry, and alabaster objects lay nearby. And among all this, there are figurines that clearly come from another culture and another world. This is not just a trade item. This is an object that had meaning. Perhaps these were images of ancestors. Perhaps they were symbols of the homeland that were preserved even after conversion to a new faith. Byzantine Palestine was a crossroads. Caravans, ships, and traders came from Africa, Arabia, and India. These figurines could travel hundreds of miles, change hands dozens of times, and end up here, in the sand, among the gravestones. For archaeologists, this is a rare find. It shows how deeply and complexly cultures mixed. Priestess from Peru. Archaeologists in Peru have found a burial of a woman that is over 1,000 years old. She was lying in a grave surrounded by important objects: vessels, jewelry, and fragments of fabric. These things indicate her high status. Most likely she was a priestess. The burial was arranged with attention to detail. Her body was carefully laid out, and around her were objects associated with rituals or worship. They helped to preserve her memory and status, even after death. This is not just a grave, it is a sign of respect and reverence. What is interesting is that despite its age, this find is quite well preserved. Fabric, jewelry, even bones, everything is in good condition. Sand and dryness help to preserve details that usually disappear after centuries. Helped swallow, breathe, and talk. Polish archaeologists have discovered a unique medical prosthesis designed for a person with a cleft palate, which is about 300 years old. This defect occurs when the roof of the mouth does not close properly during development and can now be corrected with surgery. However, 3 centuries ago, people were forced to look for other solutions. The prosthesis was found in the Church of St. Francis of Assisi in Krakow and is the first of its kind found in Poland. It was probably custom-made for a specific person with a cleft palate to make their life more comfortable. The device was inserted into the mouth and filled the gap in the roof of the mouth, performing functions necessary for normal life. The uniqueness of this prosthesis lies in its design. It consists of two parts: a metal plate that acts as the hard palate and a woolen lining for a snug fit to the mouth. The hard palate helps with swallowing, breathing, and speaking, and also holds objects in the mouth, preventing them from entering the nasal cavity. This small device, about 3 centimeters long and weighing only 6 grams, was quite advanced for its time. To study the prosthesis in more detail, scientists used a special microscope and X-ray analysis. They discovered that the metal parts were made of copper mixed with gold and silver. The wool pad contained traces of silver iodide, probably to protect against germs and maintain cleanliness. The first frozen man. In a steel vessel where the temperature is constantly minus 196 degrees lies a man who has put science at odds with death. His name is James Hiram Bedford, a professor of psychology, and in January 1967, he made a choice that sounded like madness to most. Doctors had literally 7 minutes after his heart stopped to carry out the protocol. A respirator maintained oxygen for the brain, veins were filled with dimethyl sulfoxide instead of blood, the body was placed on dry ice and transferred to a Dewar flask with liquid nitrogen. From that second, his biography changed to an experiment lasting decades. Not about immortality, but about a daring challenge to time. Is it possible to stop life, and where does personality end? Bedford's capsule wandered between storage facilities, survived lawsuits from relatives and pressure from the insurance company. His son transported it on a trailer, and in the early 90s, Alcor specialists took the body out for examination. The face looked younger than its 73 years. Individual areas of the skin were discolored, the corneas were white from the ice, but overall the preservation was better than expected, and Bedford was returned to a new vessel. Today he rests in Scottsdale next to dozens of cryo patients. The end of this story has not been put. Ahead are only the storage regulations and a long countdown of waiting. Since then, cryobiology has come a long way. Rough freezing has been replaced by vitrification, dimethyl sulfoxide has been sent to the archives, and the destruction of tissue by ice crystals is restrained by precise control of cooling and heating. No one promises resurrection tomorrow, and frankly, the most pressing question is not even about a cure for cancer, but about whether neural connections will survive that very long for now. This is what gets me. One human life voluntarily became an experience for descendants so that we could finally answer what death is, a switch or a long pause that can be rewound. Treasure on a walk. In Britain, a man went for a walk with a metal detector, just to look at a field where some Roman things had been found before. He expected to find fragments at most, but instead he found one of the largest hoards of coins in recent years, almost 1,500 bronze coins from the time of Roman Britain, 3rd to 4th centuries AD. Many have portraits of emperors, inscriptions, symbols. The condition is surprisingly good. Almost all are clean, not burnt, without signs of destruction. They lay in the ground as if they had been put there yesterday. What is interesting is that there was no building or burial signs nearby. The coins were simply in the ground, as if someone had put them away for later and never returned. The man acted according to the rules. He reported the find, called archaeologists. The hoard was documented, handed over to the museum. He received payment, but the main thing here is not the money. The main thing is how thin the line is between everyday life and history. Sometimes it is enough to simply walk across a field to pull out of the ground something that has been silent for centuries. Deserted castle. In the middle of the dunes in the Algerian desert there is a ruin. Lonely, without roads, without a name. Tourists do not get here. There are almost no satellite images. The place is called Sardra, but this is unofficial. Ksar in Berber means palace or castle, and Dra is the name of the river that once flowed nearby. No one knows who built this castle. No exact dating, no remains of a settlement around, only stone outlines against the sand. It seems as if the structure was cut out of time and simply forgotten. It is amazing that even in the era of geolocation, drones, and expeditions, there are places that almost no one has heard of. And perhaps it is these ruins that are most important because they do not fit into the usual picture. The magic of words about the future. Do you hear the difference between "it's raining tomorrow" and "it will rain tomorrow"? In the first version, the future sounds like part of the current picture. In the second, like something that will happen later. English often chooses the second, "it will rain tomorrow." German often gets by with the first in conversation. Morgen regne es. In Chinese, there is no separate future tense. It is specified by words marks and context. A trifle of grammar suddenly becomes a convenient lens. In some languages, tomorrow is next to today. In others, it is pushed back. Why know this if you are not a linguist? There is an observation that behavioral economists love. Speakers of the soft future are more likely to take actions that are calculated for later minus savings, insurance, regular checkups, education. Not because the formula in the head is magical, but because it is easier for the brain to make the decision, "I'm doing it now for tomorrow," when tomorrow sounds close in the language. This is not a strict causality. Culture, income, family, and politics have no less influence. But the connection is noticeable and useful in everyday life. How can this be applied? Formulate your speech to suit the task. Not, "I'll start saving someday, but I'll put aside 10% in October." Not, "I should go running, but I'll run 3 kilometers on Wednesday evenings." Not, "I'll study the language after the holidays, but I'll do my homework at 6 on Sunday." Where language does not put a wall between today and tomorrow, habits stick more easily. And this is the rare case when a change in wording really changes the action. From a vague "later," we get a specific step in the calendar. Scientists do not fully agree on what comes first, language or habits. In some studies, the effect of speech is noticeable even taking into account income and values, while in others, language looks more like a mirror of these factors. The practical conclusion is simple. The wording helps you act. You say, "I'll put aside 10% in October," and the step becomes real. Leather shoes from the tomb. Chinese archaeologists are restoring 1,400-year-old leather shoes found in the Astana tombs, capital of the ancient kingdom of Gaocheng. German experts are helping with the restoration. Finding such old leather or textiles is rare, as they quickly decompose when exposed to air. The shoes, recovered from an archive of objects excavated since the 1950s, are 24 centimeters long and consist of upper, shaft, and sole pieces sewn from goatskin with animal sinew. Archaeologists have been exploring the tombs for more than a century. Since the 1950s, 456 tombs have been studied in 14 excavations, yielding some 10,000 valuable relics. The hot, dry climate preserved many items that would otherwise have been destroyed, including 300 leather items. Ancient shoes have been found in other archaeological sites around the world. For example, hundreds of shoes or moccasins were found in a cave in Utah that was inhabited about 850 years ago. On the shores of the Great Salt Lake, 207 moccasins made from animal skins, mostly children's, were found. The soles of the shoes were made of full buffalo leather lined with fur and stitched at the heel, characteristic of the Canadian subarctic style. The presence of so many children's shoes indicates a thriving population, despite people leaving the region due to drought. These shoes were created by the promontory culture. In May 2014, the world's oldest pair of trousers was discovered in China. Archaeologists have found the remains of 2 nomads and 3,000-year-old patterned trousers in western China, supporting the theory that the switch from tunics to trousers was a practical decision for horsemen. It is impossible to say exactly when humans began making clothing due to the rapid decomposition of fabrics, but estimates range from 100,000 to 500,000 years ago. The first clothes were made from skins, fur, herbs, leaves, bones, and shells. The oldest dyed fibers were found in a cave in Georgia and are 36,000 years old. Forgotten civilization. On one of the plateaus in western India, far from cities and tourist routes, archaeologists have discovered petroglyphs that, according to preliminary estimates, are more than 12,000 years old. They are carved directly into the stone surface. The figures are strange, as if stylized people with elongated bodies, heads, and arms that are more reminiscent of something else. Some of the images evoke direct parallels with the mythology of Sumer and the Indus civilization. A similar image is found on seals found in Mesopotamia. There it is interpreted as a celestial being, a mediator between the worlds. And here is the same silhouette, suddenly, on the Indian plateau, thousands of kilometers away. Scientists are cautious in their assessments. They talk about the coincidence of forms. They say that we cannot yet talk about a single culture. But there is another point of view. Perhaps these images are the last trace of a civilization that we know nothing about at all, which lived long before writing, before the Vedas, before the Indus culture, and its traces remained only on stone. There are more questions than answers. Who carved them? What do they mean? Why are they so similar to images from other parts of the ancient world? And how did it happen that these signs were literally underfoot, but almost no one knew about them? The miner's little guardian. Until the end of the 20th century, miners did not go underground alone. They had a canary with them, in a cage or on their shoulder, not as a talisman, but as a signal. The bird sensed dangerous gas before a person. When it stopped singing, started to rush about, or lost consciousness, it meant it was time to go up immediately. Sometimes people had no other warning. In Britain, these birds were officially used until 1986. In other countries, longer. It was a simple but reliable way to survive, and it became firmly entrenched in miner culture, a small living creature that falls silent first, and thus saves others. What are these creepy creatures? A strange creature has been hanging around in the ocean plankton for a century and a half, the Y-larvae. It looks like an ordinary microscopic crustacean, only no one has ever seen its adult form. But scientists have made a sensational conclusion based on studying genes. According to large sets of genes, these creatures are distant relatives of barnacles and most likely parasites. If you add a crustacean molting hormone to them, the neat larva suddenly takes off its suit and turns into a tiny slug. This is exactly how parasitic acorns begin life inside the host. That's why we have never seen the adult stage of this creature, because it hides in the body of another animal. The team collected thousands of such larvae, lined them up on the crustacean tree, and showed this is a separate line with enormous hidden diversity. More than 100 different forms were found in one Japanese port. It seems that their adult stage is a hidden life inside another animal. The larva, which we see as Y, is just a transport. The next step is to attach to the host, dissolve in its tissues, and disappear from sight. That's why there is no photo of the adult in textbooks. It should have been looked for, not in the water, but in the body of the prey. When this happens, the century-old mystery will finally have an end. Underground room under the pyramids. Scientists from Japan and Egypt conducted a study of the giant necropolis in Giza. Their attention was drawn to a plot in the Western Cemetery. Members of the ruling family and high-ranking officials were buried here. The burials were in tombs with flat roofs arranged in a row. There is a free area between them that has not been previously studied. Japanese and Egyptian scientists examined it using ground-penetrating radar and electrical tomography, which made it possible to look deeper without excavation. The scan showed that at a depth of half a meter to 2 meters, there is an L-shaped structure measuring approximately 10 by 10 meters. The authors of the study believe that this is not a natural formation, but an artificial one due to its regular shape and location. Researchers suggest that this structure may be part of a deeper structure. At a depth of 5 to 10 meters, the instruments also recorded an anomaly, indicating the heterogeneity of the rock. This could be another tomb or an artifact chamber. Unicorn horn. Let me introduce you to the life of a medieval unicorn. This creature, although mythical, faced the cruel attitude of humanity. People hunted unicorns for their magical horns, which were believed to have unique properties, such as the ability to purify water and remove poison from food. Unicorns were believed to exist according to the testimony of many ancient scientists, including Aristotle and Ctesias, as well as great minds such as Leonardo da Vinci. In the Middle Ages, unicorns personified purity and wisdom. Their horns became a symbol of prosperity and could serve as an indicator of food poisoning among the aristocracy. But how do you find a unicorn horn in a world where these creatures don't exist? This question has been answered through the use of the horns of other animals such as rhinoceroses or walruses. Most popular, however, are the tusks of narwhals, animals from the Arctic whose curled tusks have been mistaken for centuries for the horns of unicorns. Travelers and hunters secretly obtained these horns and sold them to Europeans as the horns of mythical creatures. Thus, merchants and great rulers like Lorenzo de' Medici and Queen Elizabeth I paid huge sums for these tusks, considering them symbols of power and protection. Even the Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Torquemada did not travel without a piece of such a horn, believing that it could save his life from heretics. With the development of science and the progress of research methods, belief in the miraculous properties of unicorn horns has subsided, and now they remain only exhibits in museums, a reminder of how legends and reality were intertwined in human history. Beads of the Silk Road. Archaeologists have studied unique beads from the tomb of a mysterious woman nicknamed the Red Princess of the Silk Road. The burial was found in Xinjiang, China, about 15 years ago, but it has recently attracted special attention due to its unusual jewelry. The age of the find is more than 2,000 years. Experts examined 8 bright red beads and found out that they were made of rare Mediterranean corals. Analysis showed that the material was brought from the shores of the Western Mediterranean. This speaks of the long distance and amazing trade relations of ancient China, because corals were considered a luxury at that time and were valued almost as much as gold and precious stones. Scientists suggest that these decorations came to Central Asia along the Silk Road, a trade route connecting the East and the West. Apparently, the beads were not just decoration, but a symbol of wealth, prestige, or power of a woman. Anatomical Machines by Raimondo di Sangro. In Naples, in the basement of the San Severo Chapel, there are 2 exhibits that still excite the imagination of visitors and scientists. These are the so-called anatomical machines, 2 skeletons, male and female, around which the circulatory system is carefully reproduced. Arteries, veins, and capillaries intertwine the bones, passing through the head, chest, and limbs. For centuries, there were legends that the vessels were real and the skeletons were the remains of people sacrificed for the sake of science. Allegedly, the anatomist Giuseppe Salerno, on the instructions of Prince Raimondo di Sangro, during his lifetime injected his servants with a special substance that caused the blood to petrify and keep the vessels in perfect condition. In fact, everything is a little more prosaic. The vessels are made of wax, wire, and silk, but with such precision that even modern experts do not exclude that experiments were conducted on living people before the creation of the machines. Prince Raimondo was an extraordinary person. An alchemist, inventor, and experimenter, he created fireworks that resembled architectural landscapes, counterfeited jewelry, and allegedly invented an eternal flame that burned for 3 months. At one time, next to the female skeleton, there was a third one, the skeleton of a fetus connected to the placenta. But in the 1990s, it was stolen. Nevertheless, the anatomical machines still amaze and frighten, and this apparently was their purpose. Stoned Room. High in the Andes, in the ancient complex of Chavan de Huantar, archaeologists stumbled upon a room they weren't supposed to find. It was completely closed, with no visible entrances, no windows, no doors, just a narrow opening, as if someone had deliberately hidden this space from prying eyes. Inside, there are 23 artifacts. All are related to the use of psychoactive substances. Some are thin, hollow bird bones, sharp, perfectly processed like pipes. Research has shown that they contain traces of tobacco and DMT, a substance found in ayahuasca. And here are the questions that arise. What was this small, dark room with inhalation pipes for? Why was it isolated? Why was it built in such a way that it would then be hidden forever? One of the authors of the study says, "This is not spontaneous shamanism. This is a ritual, strictly controlled, formalized, and perhaps it was not meant for everyone. Only the elite had access to these practices, perhaps the priests or the ruling castes, because hallucinations here are not just a journey inside oneself, they are a mechanism of power. A small room, 2 or 3 people, darkness, and a hallucinogen that changes the perception of reality. Such conditions could form contact with the gods, trance, visions, and if ordinary people believed that the priests really talked to spirits, then the priest could use this as a tool, both for control and for management." Mysterious Ocean Monster. A creature that is hard to imagine with the naked eye lives in cold and temperate seas, the lion's mane jellyfish. It is a huge reddish dome with a cascade of thin threads. Measurements from different years give a similar picture. The tentacles of large specimens reach up to 30 to 37 meters, and the mass of individual giants is estimated at up to 1 ton. The threads are collected in 8 fans and each has hundreds of stinging lines. Such a curtain works as a trap for fish and other jellyfish. For humans, this is a risk of painful burns, even if the dome is far away. The name was not born by chance. The bundles of tentacles really resemble a thick mane around the dome. They are not just scary, they work like nets. The jellyfish captures plankton and small fish, sometimes other jellyfish. When the water temperature is favorable and there is an abundance of food, such creatures appear more often near the coast. Human skin is covered with burn marks after contact, and although fatal cases are rare, the impact is considerable. The title of largest jellyfish remains a subject of debate. Some refer to a giant specimen from the 19th century off the coast of New England. Others doubt the accuracy of the measurements and recall the Nomura jellyfish from the Yellow and East China Seas. Nomurs reach about 2 meters in diameter and hundreds of kilograms. During mass influxes, they clog up the fishing. The cells are not fish, but solid jellyfish. At the other extreme are tiny irukandji. The dome is only a few centimeters, and the toxin in an unsuccessful encounter can bring an adult to intensive care. The lion's mane jellyfish is not a mythical monster, but part of a large mechanism of the sea. It is eaten by leatherback turtles and large fish. It itself regulates the number of fry and plankton. The risk of encounters increases in warm years and during mass blooms of water. During such periods, it is better to pay attention to Coast Guard warnings and not dive without a wetsuit. Stone Age axe. During excavations in the south of Denmark, in Rudbyhavn, archaeologists found something that is rarely seen in this form: a stone axe, completely preserved together with a wooden handle. The age of the find is about 5,500 years, and it is the condition that makes it unique. In the conditions of peat soil, saturated with moisture and organic matter, the wood did not decompose but seemed to be frozen in time. This is not an abstract archaeological object or a rare museum artifact. This is a real working tool that could be used for construction, hunting, everyday life. The slightly curved handle, the shape of the fastening, traces of wear, everything remained in place, and all this speaks not of a symbol but of a person who held this axe, carried it with him perhaps, passed it on by inheritance, and then it was lost or abandoned and lay in the ground for thousands of years. Such finds are important not only because they are rare, but because they allow us to feel antiquity not as an abstraction, but as a continuation. Between the one who held this axe and us, there is nothing but time. A child buried like a chief. Archaeologists have discovered a burial site in a cave in Thailand that is almost 30,000 years old. The remains are about 4 years old. At first glance, nothing unusual. Child burials do occur, but this is what raised many questions. The child's body was placed in a cavity carved directly into the rock. Carefully, almost like a cradle, the face and chest were covered with red ochre, a pigment that in many ancient cultures was associated with blood, birth, and the transition between worlds. There were objects lying nearby: stone chisels, shells, jewelry. This is not just a random set. This is inventory that is most often found in the burials of leaders, shamans, or people with a special status, and certainly not in the burial of a child. Scientists did not find any traces of a mass grave or a settlement in the cave. Only one burial ground, one child, and an entire ritual assembled around him. This made me wonder, who was he? Why was he buried like this? There is a theory that it was a manifestation of an early religious tradition, or a sign that children in that society were not perceived as weak and helpless, but as bearers of something important. But there is another thought. Maybe he was the only child in the group, or he died in a special way, in his sleep, in a ritual, during a ceremony, and then his death gained weight. Not because he was a leader, but because he became a symbol. In any case, this burial ground is not just archaeology. It is one of the oldest reminders that death, even the earliest, could be a reason for a ritual, and a complex, thoughtful ritual with details that have survived to this day. The youngest archaeologist. During a routine family outing in Tel Azekah, Israel, 3-year-old Zeev Nitzan accidentally made an archaeological discovery. She found an ancient scarab, some 3,800 years old. This place is known as the site of the biblical battle between David and Goliath, and the find immediately attracted the attention of the Israel Antiquities Authority, which confirmed the authenticity and uniqueness of the artifact. It turned out that this was not just a pebble, but an ancient seal in the form of a scarab. a symbol of renewal and rebirth in Egyptian culture, which the Canaanites used as an amulet or seal. According to researchers, the scarab is associated with the Canaanite civilization, a people who inhabited the lands of the Levant in the Bronze Age. Such objects reflected the belief, status, and close cultural ties of Canaan with Egypt. The power of authority. A man in a white coat calmly says, "Go on." Behind the wall, a student is complaining about his heart and screaming. In front of you is a control panel with switches from 15 to 450 volts and a table of errors. You are the teacher. An error means punishment. Each subsequent error is a higher rank. This is what Stanley Milgram's experiment looked like at Yale in the early 1960s. The volunteer thought it was a memory study. In fact, the student was an actor and the screams were pre-recorded. The task was to check how far an ordinary person would go if an authority figure stood nearby and confidently asked, "Please go on." The experiment requires you to go on. The current scale had harsh labels like danger and XXX. At around 330 volts, the student fell silent, as if he had lost consciousness. The result shocked everyone who could believe that an ordinary person wouldn't do this. About 2/3 of the participants reached the maximum, 450 volts. Almost everyone was stressed. Their hands were shaking, the participants were sweating, laughing from nerves, arguing with the experimenter, but still pressing. They are not sadists. They did it because there was a confident scientist standing next to them who took responsibility. One thing is important. In fact, no one was given an electric shock. After the experiments, people were initiated into the truth and the idea was explained. But it was this work that became one of the reasons to reconsider the ethics of psychological research. Today, deception and pressure are strictly limited, and each project goes through an ethics committee. Repeated checks showed the main thing that it is not about bad people, but about the conditions. The further away the victim, the higher the status of the authority, the more formal the situation, the higher the obedience. As soon as colleagues appear nearby who refuse to continue, obedience falls. Reduce the distance, remove symbols of power, give the person support, and it is easier for them to say no. This experiment does not answer all the questions about good and evil, but it does show honestly that an ordinary person can go very far if a confident "keep going" sounds nearby. And it also shows honestly how simple changes in the environment restore a person's will to stop. The boundary is not only within us, it is also in the context in which we are placed. The dark history of ancient columns. Sweden is a harsh country, and even against its backdrop, there are especially bewitchingly gloomy places. One of these is a trio of stone pillars on Gallo Hill, in a nature reserve north of Visby. The site claims to be the only surviving medieval execution site in Europe. The Galgberget Gallows, located on top of a small hill in the municipality of Visby, is an eerie but historically important site, one of the few remaining from the Middle Ages. Built in the 13th century, it was used to execute local criminals. Tall stone pillars surrounded by a low stone wall supported wooden beams from which the condemned were hung with ropes and hooks. The gallows was visible from the sea, serving as a warning of the harsh consequences that awaited the criminals. During archaeological excavations, the bodies of about 30 people were discovered near the gallows. All of them were executed. Some bodies were in wooden coffins, which was a luxury and indicated that these people belonged to the upper class. This shows that not only robbers and the poor were executed here, but also members of the elite. What the largest ship of antiquity looked like. The need for huge warships appeared in mankind long before steam engines and steel hulls. Already thousands of years ago, the fleet was considered the most important instrument of influence and domination. Through it, borders were strengthened, territories were conquered, and key resources were gained. It is believed that the foundation of ancient military shipbuilding was laid by the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander the Great. It was they who first began to build real military giants, such as Polyares and Tessaraconters, comparable in scale to modern battleships. One of the most impressive ships of antiquity was the Egyptian Tessaraconter, built in the 3rd century BC by order of King Ptolemy IV Philopator. It was a real floating fortress 130 meters long and 22 meters high. The ship accommodated about 4,000 rowers, not counting the crew, marines, and supplies. The name Tessaracontera translates as 40 row, according to the number of rows of oars. The exact number of oars is controversial. Researchers cite figures from 300 to 600. According to surviving descriptions, the ship had powerful weapons, a ram, catapults, and battle towers, and outwardly resembled a mobile fortress. Its sides were decorated with wooden carved vines, crocodiles, and other mythical creatures were painted on the stern, and the bow was crowned with a 5-meter figure of Aeolus, the Lord of the Winds. Inside there were halls, statues, even libraries, and according to some sources, stables. All this spoke more about status than about practical military necessity. Tessera Contera was more a symbol of power than an effective ship. Due to its size, it did not have full maneuverability and could not even go to sea on its own. It was towed by rowboats. Nevertheless, its very existence was an engineering breakthrough. The Egyptian Tessera Contera is not just an archaic ship, but a shining example of how ancient technology could reach incredible scales. Yes, it did not become a battle legend, but it certainly went down in history as one of the most ambitious naval projects of its time. Zhang Heng's seismoscope. Year 132 AD, China, Eastern Han Dynasty. The scholar Zhang Heng shows his courtiers a large bronze vessel. Around it are 8 dragon heads, each with an open mouth. Inside is a simple but clever mechanism. When an earthquake occurs far away in the country, an invisible jolt slightly moves the internal pendulum. It presses the right lever, and a ball falls from the mouth of the corresponding dragon directly into the toad. The sound of the ball is a signal. The jolt came from this direction. Not the force, not the duration. It is the direction. The main effect of this thing is an early warning. The capital might not shake at all, but the ball was already falling. Chronicles cite a characteristic episode. The device worked, although the city was quiet. A few days later, a message came from the western province about a serious earthquake. It was useful for managing the empire, knowing where to look for destruction, where to send help, and who to call for a report. An earthquake is elastic waves in the ground and air. Even if you don't feel them, the sensitive pendulum inside the vessel oscillates. Then it's a matter of technique. A small shift translates into the movement of the lever. The lock releases the ball, and we get an unambiguous direction indicator. In essence, this is a signaler, not a recording device, but for the 2nd century it was a huge step. A natural phenomenon was translated into the language of simple mechanical actions. Modern reconstructions show that the idea is viable. By making the pendulum slightly shorter or heavier, the sensitivity is changed. The arrangement of the levers sets 8 directions. In reality, more sectors could have been used, but 8 were enough to understand where to look on the map. Footprints in stone. In 1952, in Texas, in the Paluxy riverbed, workers were clearing the stone and came across a chain of clear prints. These were dinosaur footprints, large, elongated, in some places almost a meter long. There were many of them. It seemed that ancient lizards really walked along this place, one after another, leaving a path in the stone behind them. But nearby they noticed something strange, prints similar to human feet, long with the outlines of fingers. Some of them overlapped the dinosaur tracks. It was because of this that the place became a source of controversy. Some people saw a sensation in the find. Supposedly, this was proof that people and dinosaurs existed at the same time. Scientists were more cautious. Some explained the shape of the tracks by erosion, others, fakes. There are known cases when such human tracks were cut directly into limestone, then sold to tourists. There is still no exact version. But regardless of the controversy, the painting itself is the imprint of movement left 100 million years ago, and that is already amazing enough. Artifacts that shouldn't be here. In the south of Israel, archaeologists have excavated a site that it would seem shouldn't stand out in any way. But everything changed when they began to study the objects found. The ground contained clay vessels and bronze objects, the style of which does not coincide with the local cultural tradition. Ornaments, shapes, even the composition of the alloys. All this was more reminiscent of objects found earlier in other regions of the Middle East and even further. There was no temple or permanent settlement nearby. Only fragments that seem to have been brought here on purpose. It seems that this place was used for rituals or temporary gatherings, perhaps by nomadic tribes that had ties to distant cultures. Officially, the objects are considered atypical for the region, but questions remain. Who brought them? Why? And why here? So far, these are only hypotheses, but the find itself stands out from the usual picture of the history of the desert. Bringing the brain back to life. In 2019, a Yale team received pig brains immediately after slaughter. 4 hours had passed. Then the samples were connected to a closed system. Pumps slowly circulated a warm solution with oxygen and protective components through the vessels. The task was simple in formulation and complex in essence, to support tissue that had already gone beyond the usual understanding of after death. After a few hours, the vessels began to pass the flow of solution again. The cells returned to basic metabolism. Neurons retained an electrical charge and responded to local stimuli. This is not resurrection. There was no organized brain activity, and it was additionally suppressed with drugs. The researchers did not cross the ethical line and did not try to gain consciousness. The main conclusion is clear even to a child. Death is not a single click, but a chain of different stages. Individual functions fade away one after another, and some of them are reversible if the tissue structure is not destroyed. This is why it is not so important in cryobiology to freeze at any cost, but to preserve the shape and connections without ice and breaks. The more carefully the tissue is preserved, the higher the chance of returning the basic processes later. The experiment shows that the dying process is extended over time. The cells have a short period when they still hold on and respond to stimuli. If you do not allow ice crystals to destroy the membranes and maintain the environment, the functions gradually return. Therefore, the main priority is to preserve the tissue now so that later there is something to actually turn it on with. History of Port Arthur Prison. About an hour-and-a-half drive from the capital of Tasmania, Hobart, is one of the darkest places in the history of Australia, the Port Arthur Penal Settlement. From 1830 to 1877, the most dangerous criminals of the British Empire were held here. After Great Britain lost the ability to send prisoners to the United States, the choice fell on distant Australian lands. Initially, Port Arthur was just a logging station, but soon it turned into a full-fledged complex with 60 buildings, including prisons, churches, punishment cells, and even well-kept gardens, laid out by the hands of the convicts themselves. More than 12,500 people suffered here. The conditions were harsh. Underground cells, isolation in complete darkness and silence, hard physical labor. All this broke the will and left deep marks on the psyche. One of the most terrible stories is the murder of Joseph Shuttleworth in the prison church. He was hacked to death by another prisoner while he was working. The motive remains unknown, and on the Isle of the Dead, where prisoners were buried, one of the convicts allegedly encountered the devil himself. Since the prison closed, stories of ghosts have been appearing here. From the sounds of footsteps and children's laughter to the ghosts of women and soldiers, Port Arthur is considered one of the most unclean places in Australia. Today it is an open-air museum and a UNESCO heritage site. But even on a sunny day, there is something disturbing here: the memory of those who spent their last days within these walls. The Stone Age may turn out to be wooden. Researchers believe that human ancestors knew how to process wood 3 million years ago. In 1836, Danish archaeologist Christian Jørgensen Thomsen proposed a chronology from the Stone Age to the Bronze and Iron Ages, which became the basis of archaeology. However, archaeologist Thomas Terberger is ready to rewrite history and believes that the Stone Age can be replaced by the Wooden Age. He suggests that wooden tools last as long as stone ones, that is, 2.5 or 3 million years. It's just that the wood decomposes faster. Primitive stone tools are characteristic of the Lower Paleolithic, but wood has been found in only 10 of the thousands of archaeological sites from that era. Terberger led a study of wooden objects found in peat in a coal mine near Schöningen in Germany from 1994 to 2008. Among the artifacts were spears and throwing sticks dating from the end of the warm interglacial period 300,000 years ago. These discoveries upended the idea of human ancestors who were previously considered simple scavengers. People who lived before Homo sapiens created tools and hunting weapons, cooperated to hunt, and knew how to butcher game. 3D microscopy and micro-CT scanners found signs of wear on 187 pieces of wood. Until now, it was believed that only modern people were involved in wood processing. Among the finds were sticks, kitchen utensils, and household tools made of spruce, pine, and larch. The wood was cut down on a mountain 2 to 3 kilometers from the discovery site. The analysis showed that Stone Age people carefully processed wood following a certain order: removing bark, removing branches, sharpening tips, hardening in fire. Wooden tools turned out to be more complex than stone ones. Heron's steam toy. Alexandria, 1st century AD. The inventor Heron shows a thing that looks like a magic trick, but in fact is pure physics. A copper ball is mounted on an axis and hangs over a brazier. A tube goes down from the ball to a vessel with water. Two small tubes are cut into the ball, curved in different directions. When the water under the ball is heated, the steam rises inside, bursts out of the nozzles, and the ball begins to rotate. This is jet thrust in its simplest form. We are used to seeing steam engines in a 19th century textbook, but the principle was shown here in antiquity. Heated the water, got movement. Heron's second thing is even more spectacular. Auto doors in a temple. The scheme is as follows. A fire is lit on the altar. Under the altar is a closed vessel with water. The fire heats the air in the cavity. The pressure increases and pushes the water through the tube into another vessel. It gets heavier and pulls the doors through a system of pulleys and ropes. The doors swing open by themselves. The priests put out the fire, the pressure drops, the water siphons back, the counterweight outweighs, the doors close smoothly. No magic. Heat minus pressure minus movement. Heron also made other devices. A coin-operated machine with holy water, a water clock, even small scenes with figurines that went according to a program. But it is the steam ball and the temple doors that best illustrate the idea. Complex science often begins with a very simple visual diagram that can be explained in a minute and shown on the table. Stone cubes. Not far from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a group of tourists came to the edge of a canyon. At first glance, they are ordinary rock formations, but the longer you look, the more you get the feeling that something is wrong. The edges of the cliffs are perfectly straight. The edges are smooth, as if they were cut not by time, but by something sharp. In some places, the stone masses form clear cubes. Each weighs about 100 tons. There are no signs of processing, but there is no chaos of nature here either. Everything is too geometric. Comparisons immediately began online. Someone remembered the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, mysterious stone slabs going underwater. Someone, the megaliths of Baalbek. But still, the main reaction is the same. It looks wrong, too right to be natural, too unwieldy to be man-made. Scientists, of course, can explain a lot. Weathering, crystal geometry, pressure, faults. But visually, it is not convincing, because when you stand next to these forms, you do not get the feeling that nature did this. The question arises, if it is really artificial, then who did this and why? This is not the first and not the last place where nature seems to accidentally depict someone's work. But sometimes there is a suspicion that everything is the other way around, that it is not nature that imitates technology, but we who have not yet understood who was here before us. Ancient house in the Sinai Desert. In Egypt, archaeologists have discovered a 3,500-year-old structure in the Sinai Desert identified as a royal recreation area. The ruins of this fortified area were found at the archaeological site of Tel Habwa. The palace, intended for the rest of the pharaoh and his entourage, was built of mud brick. It was part of the fortified complexes built near the eastern gate of Egypt to house troops. Dating showed that the palace was built during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, known for his military campaigns. The kings of ancient Egypt regularly made military expeditions to the eastern Mediterranean. The Sinai Desert was one of the routes of the Egyptian troops. The pharaoh's rest house was a strategic object, the center of the fortress, where the ruler and his army rested. Here the warriors recuperated and replenished supplies before their campaigns. 10 days without sleep. In the 1960s, 17-year-old schoolboy Randy Gardner decided to test how long a person could go without sleep. At first, it was a project for a school science fair, then sleep experts got involved. He was constantly kept in motion and under observation. Conversations, night walks, board games, basketball, pinball, simple tests of memory and attention. The first 2 days were a classic picture: yawning, irritability, difficulty maintaining focus. By the third day, speech and coordination began to float. It became more difficult to formulate simple thoughts. On the fourth or fifth day, deceptions of the senses appeared. Shadows turned into figures. Pieces of text floated away. It seemed that he heard things that were not there. Reactions slowed down. Memory began to fail. He forgot what he did a minute ago. By the 6th to 8th day, his mood was jumping. Logical problems were very difficult, but his usual actions still held. He could show a normal series in pinball if the movement was brought to automatism. By the 9th to 11th day, microsleeps began. Short switch-offs for seconds, when the eyes are open and the brain fails for a moment. It became difficult to count. Words got mixed up. Strange ideas appeared, which were immediately forgotten. After the experiment, he slept for about 14 hours, woke up, ate, and fell asleep again for another night. After a couple of days, the regimen almost leveled out. Doctors did not record any serious consequences at that time, although Gardner himself later recalled that he had problems with sleep. The Guinness Book of Records no longer accepts such records. Too risky. What this story shows in simple words: lack of sleep quickly affects attention, emotions, and self-control. Then microsleeps kick in. The brain itself takes over. It's better to leave records to textbooks. In everyday life, even one night without sleep makes a person different. The untold riches of the Incas. The treasure of Langanadis is one of the most fascinating legends of the lost riches of South America. According to legend, the Inca treasures, gold, silver, statues, and jewels, were hidden by the military leader Rumiñahui in the Langanadis Mountains in the east of modern-day Ecuador. This happened after the Spanish executed the Inca ruler Atahualpa in 1533, despite the fact that the Inca people had already begun to collect a ransom for him. Rumiñahui, upon learning of Atahualpa's death, ordered all the collected riches to be hidden so that they would not fall into the hands of the invaders. The Spanish captured him and subjected him to cruel torture, but he never revealed the secret of the treasure's location. Since then, the treasure of Langanadis has been the subject of many expeditions and searches, but none have been successful. The dense jungles, impassable mountain paths, and fogs of this region still hold the secret of the Inca gold. The legend lives on, inspiring treasure hunters from all over the world to search for the most mysterious treasure of South America. States that don't exist. Some countries have no army, no recognition, no clear borders, but they have a flag, they have an anthem, and there are people who call it their homeland. So-called self-proclaimed states are springing up all over the world, without coordination, without negotiations, without consent. Someone just declares independence one day and considers it a fact. In 1977, an American named Kevin Baugh declared that his plot of land in Nevada was now the Republic of Molossia. He issued his own passports, made a coat of arms, made up laws, and declared himself president. No country recognized this, but Molossia still exists. It has a website, a flag, and even prints its own currency. A similar story is with northern Sedland. This country is located on a former offshore platform in the North Sea. It was occupied, a flag was raised, and declared a state. Legally, it is just a metal structure, but it has a prince and a website. Other examples sound even stranger. Somewhere a republic of one apartment is proclaimed. Somewhere a micro-empire of 2 tents in the desert. Somewhere a state founded by children that unexpectedly lasted for several years. Some of these projects are a joke. Some are a serious attempt to make a statement in a world where not everyone gets a say. And almost always it is a protest against borders, against stories, against other people's decisions. Engineer from the future. In 1961, in the archives of the Romanian city of Sibiu, a professor was looking through old military records and accidentally came across a manuscript. Between the tables and calculations were strange diagrams. Not crossbows, not guns, but multi-stage rockets, stabilizers, nozzles, references to fuel. Everything looked like technical documentation from the 20th century, but the document was created in the 16th century. The author was Conrad Haas, an artillery master who served at the court in Transylvania. He ran the barracks, drew diagrams, wrote without embellishment and unnecessary words. His treatise was simply called How to Make a Good Rocket That Can Rise into the Sky on Its Own. Drawings, calculations, rare explanations, everything, as if he really tried to build something that did not exist at that time. Little is known about his life. He was born in 1509, was an engineer, did not participate in battles but created weapons. At the very end of the manuscript he left a phrase unlike anything else. More peace and less war. Let the guns remain under the roof. Let there be no shot. Then the prince will save his money and the gunsmith his life. It's not a statement, just a quiet line at the bottom of the page. The first heart transplant. December 1967. Cape Town, Groot Schuur Hospital. Surgeon Christian Barnard is preparing something that no one has ever done before: a human heart transplant. The patient is 53-year-old Louis Washkansky with severe heart failure, almost no chance. The donor is a young woman who died in an accident. Doctors declare her brain dead. The family agrees to the donation. The team enters the operating room and carries out what then looked like pure science at the edge of the possible. The donor's heart is cooled and transferred to the patient's chest. The vessels are sewn up, connected to the bloodstream, the clamps are removed, and the heart, which a minute ago was lying on the table, makes its first push in a new body. It was a moment after which the headlines around the world could no longer sound the same. Washkansky lived 18 days. He died not from heart failure, but from pneumonia. Strong immunosuppressants were given to protect against rejection, and the body could not cope with the infection. A few months later, the second patient, Philip Bleiberg, had already lived for a year and a half. For that time, this was a serious result. It became clear that the operation itself was possible, and the main problem was controlling the immune system and infection. Then everything came down to details on which life depends. Surgeons improved the technique, and pharmacologists came up with new drugs. In the early 1980s, cyclosporin appeared, and survival rates increased dramatically. Heart transplants ceased to be one bold operation and became a common practice for thousands of people a year. Yes, the donor shortage and the risk of rejection did not go away, but the idea of replacing the engine ceased to be science fiction. This story is about price and boundaries. Some argued whether it is possible to declare death based on brain criteria and when exactly it is allowed to remove organs. Barnard took a step that allowed medicine to move forward and give new life to hundreds of thousands of people. Monster burrows. There are thousands of tunnels in South America. Some are as narrow as animal burrows. Others are like the corridors of a military base, 4 meters wide and hundreds of meters long. Who dug them? Water and lava are out of the question. Geologists unanimously say, not nature. There are furrows on the walls as if from claws. In one of these caves in Argentina, they found the answer: the skeletons of 2 giant sloths. They weighed 4 tons each. Their claws were up to 20 centimeters long. That's what they needed tunnels of this size for. It is believed that they dug burrows for generations to raise their offspring and hide from the glacial climate. And narrower passages could belong to other monsters, ancient giant armadillos. Their modern descendants also dig, but on a smaller scale. And here the question arises: what else lies beneath our feet if such tunnels could be dug not by people, but by animals? Bloody footprints of Kyoto castles. There is one strange detail in Japanese castles of the 16th century that tourists rarely notice. On some wooden floors, there are dark stains, not paint, not drawings. These are real imprints of human bodies left after samurai committed suicide, and they are still visible. Such traces remained, for example, in Fushimi Castle near Kyoto. In 1600, during one of the sieges, several dozen samurai committed suicide to avoid being captured. The blood was absorbed into the wood, and then the panels on which their silhouettes remained were removed and transferred to other temples as a tribute to the fallen. Now they are called Yurei Ita, cursed boards. But formally there is no mysticism, just memory, literally absorbed into the floor. In the photographs, you can see how the outlines of bodies are imprinted on the floor, the contours of hands, heads, hips. It was as if people had laid down and disappeared, leaving only a shadow behind them. The Great Bell of Dhammaseti. The Great Bell of Dhammaseti is considered the largest bell ever made. It was cast in 1484 by order of the King of Myanmar Dhammaseti and installed on the famous Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon, one of the most sacred places for Buddhists in the country. According to historical data, the weight of the bell exceeded 290 tons, which makes it a record holder among similar structures. However, the fate of the bell was tragic. In 1608, the Portuguese mercenary and adventurer Felipe de Brito captured Yangon and decided to take the bell to melt it down for weapons. While transporting it across the Bogo River, he miscalculated the weight of the structure. The bell capsized the barge and sank to the bottom. Since then, it has not been possible to find it despite numerous attempts. Today, the Great Bell of Dhammaseti remains part of the legends and national pride of Myanmar. Its story is a reminder of how culture, spirituality, and greed can be intertwined in one artifact, the fate of which remains a mystery to this day. Trilithon. In Baalbek, in the foundation of the Temple of Jupiter, there are 3 huge stone blocks that still amaze even experienced archaeologists. They are called trilithon. Imagine the scale. Each block weighs almost 800 tons, and the dimensions are impressive. About 19 meters long, a little more than 4 meters high, and about 3.6 meters wide. Even now, lifting and moving such giant stones would be difficult, and the ancient builders did not have cranes or special equipment at their disposal. It is still not entirely clear how exactly these giant stones were delivered and laid. It is believed that the stone blocks were moved on special wooden sleds, using logs and hundreds of workers. Some even assume that aliens participated in the construction, but serious scientists reject such hypotheses. Trilithon is not just the foundation of a temple, but a striking example of how complex the engineering knowledge of ancient civilizations was. Perhaps future discoveries will help to solve the mystery of the appearance of such massive structures in antiquity. How they wrote before the Romans. In the Spanish province of Leon, archaeologists have made a discovery that could change our understanding of early writing on the Iberian Peninsula. In the ancient settlement of La Peña del Castro, a spindle whorl was discovered, a small object used in weaving with an engraved inscription in the Celtic alphabet. The age of the artifact is about the 1st century BC. This is one of the northernmost and earliest finds of its kind. Before the arrival of the Romans, writing was practically not used in these parts, so the inscription became a real sensation. Scientists suggest that the text could have been a sign of ownership or had a symbolic meaning, for example, to show the status of the owner. Interestingly, the spindle whorl is made of local talc, which means it was made on site. It was found in a storeroom where there were also baskets of seeds, tools, and even the remains of dried meat. All this indicates a fairly developed way of life and economy. This find is important evidence that local cultures were much more complex than previously thought and had already begun to master writing. 3 amazing artifacts. Archaeologists have made a discovery that could change our understanding of the history of ancient Egypt. The lost tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose II was recently found, an event comparable to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. However, unlike the famous Golden Boy tomb, the tomb of Thutmose II was badly damaged. After the pharaoh's death, the room was flooded and most of the relics were probably moved to another location. One of the key artifacts is fragments of alabaster vessels decorated with the name of Thutmose II. These duck-shaped vessels were used in rituals and testified to the high status of their owner. The inscription on them helped confirm that the tomb did indeed belong to this pharaoh. Another important find is fragments of paintings that fell from the ceiling and walls. The researchers found that the ceiling was once painted blue and dotted with stars, and the walls were decorated with texts from the Book of Amduat, an ancient Egyptian text that tells of the journey of the sun god Ra in the afterlife. Such images were only found in the tombs of pharaohs and close nobles. Another artifact found was a wooden rod that could have been part of a spear or a ceremonial fan used for fanning the pharaoh. The shaft bears an inscription with the title of the king, which became further evidence that the tomb belonged to Thutmose II. How the Mayans cooked rubber. The Mayans got rubber from 2 juices. They take the white milky juice of the rubber tree. They add a little green juice of a forest liana. They stir it with a stick, and the liquid thickens before their eyes, darkens, and becomes viscous. After a couple of minutes, what they have in their hands is no longer milk, but a soft elastic mass. They knead it, roll it, dry it, and the result is a material that springs back and does not creep. Why it works in simple terms. The white juice is latex, many tiny droplets of rubber in water. The liana juice changes the environment and the drops begin to stick together. The mass becomes solid and elastic. No ovens or sulfur. Everything is done in the cold from plant materials. The hardness was regulated by proportions. If it is softer, they add less liana juice and knead it longer. If a strong ball is needed, they add more and dry it thicker. The master literally tuned the material to the task with his hands like dough. They made heavy bouncing balls for games from this so that they would bounce off the floor and walls. Glue and sealant for vessels and boats. Impregnation for baskets and fabric so that they would not leak. Pads for handles and sandals so that they would not slip and last longer. Rubber was molded into ingots and taken for exchange. It was a valuable commodity. And most importantly, all this was an ordinary craft. 2 juices, a stick for stirring, a little experience, and you have ready-made rubber in your hands long before the factories and vulcanization in Europe. Craftsman's chest. In 1936, on the island of Gotland, a farmer lifted a plow and came across a wooden chest, chained and locked. There was no gold or weapons inside. There were tools, more than 200 of them. Hammers, drills, chisels, saws, scissors, forged locks and hinges. Everything was in working order without decoration, with obvious signs of use. Age, about 1,000 years. All of this belonged to a craftsman of the Viking Age. And what is especially interesting is that the shape of most of the objects is almost no different from modern ones. Hammers with a convenient weight distribution, scissors with elastic handles, chisels, sharp, precise. Many of them could lie in a box of a modern carpenter and would not raise questions. The chest was found on the site of a former lake. Why it ended up there is unknown. It could have been hidden from robbers or drowned while leaving in a hurry. Perhaps its owner simply did not have time to return. And then the place was forgotten, but the things remained. Metal was expensive in that era. Such a set was not just property, it was work, craft, accumulated knowledge. In this chest, not a legend, not a relic. Just life, collected in one box. Vaccine against fear. For a long time, people believed that life generates itself. Bread has become moldy. It means that mold has appeared on its own. Meat has gone bad. It means that worms have been born. It seemed logical. After all, no one sees how invisible creatures get there. Pasteur made a simple and clear experiment. He took flasks with nutrient broth, boiled them, killed all living things. He stretched out the neck of each flask and bent it in the form of a long swan neck. Air passed inside freely, but dust with microbes settled in the bends and did not reach the broth. The result, the broth remained transparent and clean for weeks and months. It was worth tilting the flask so that the broth touched the dust in the bend or breaking off the neck. The liquid quickly became cloudy. This means that life does not arise out of nothing. It is carried in by the air along with the dust. From this grew a simple practice that we still use today. Boiling, sterile instruments, closed jars, clean operating rooms. These are the direct heirs of these flasks. Pasteurization of milk, the same logic. Heat to kill germs and close the way to a new batch of guests. A few years later, Pasteur went even further, from cleanliness to protection. He was looking for a way to tame the disease. For anthrax, chicken cholera, and most importantly for rabies, he sought to weaken the pathogen and made a series of vaccinations so that the immune system would learn to fight in advance. The story of rabies became a symbol. In 1885, 9-year-old Joseph Meister was brought to him in Paris, severely bitten by a rabid dog. At that time, this almost always ended in death in agony. Pasteur decided he made a course of vaccinations with his not yet approved method. The boy survived. For thousands of people, this sounded like a vaccine for fear. For the first time, a deadly disease had a real shield. The power of this story is in its clarity. A couple of flasks showed us where the infection comes from. A couple of careful steps, and you have in your hands a tool that saves food, operating rooms, and people. No magic, only cleanliness, warmth, and understanding of how the invisible world really works. Lucky amulet. Sometimes archaeology finds not an artifact but a character. For example, recently in Britain, at the site of an ancient settlement from the Roman Empire, archaeologists pulled a bronze figurine out of the ground. Small, rough, almost primitive, it looks like just a piece of metal, but the shape is immediately recognizable. It's a phallus, the most common Roman amulet. And if today it causes laughter, then in ancient times it was considered one of the most powerful protections. Such pendants were worn around the neck, attached to belts, screwed to strollers, even hung over children's beds. The phallus was not vulgarity, it was a talisman, a symbol of strength, life, luck, protection from the evil eye and everything bad. The find is small. No gold, no carvings, no inscriptions, just bronze, worn away by time. But this is also strength, because the amulet was clearly used. It was worn, fiddled with in the hand. Maybe they lost it. Maybe it belonged to a soldier, or a merchant, or a child. Someone believed that this little thing would hold back trouble, and now, 2,000 years later, it's back in the light. Didn't work. Who knows? It outlived its owner, its empire, its era, everything but its shape. A figure without a face. In the Gobekli Cave in Azerbaijan, archaeologists have found a tiny sandstone figurine, just 5 centimeters long. The details are amazingly precise. Hairstyle, belt, clothing, but the face is missing. No gender, no expression, only a restrained pose and a sense of image. This find is about 9,000 years old. This is the first Mesolithic human figurine found in the South Caucasus, but its value is not in its primacy. It is in the fact that it exists. In a region where ceramics were not yet known, someone was already trying to carve a person. Scientists believe that the figurine belongs to the transitional era, when nomads became sedentary, and not just dwellings arose, but rituals, memory, symbol. The Neolithic did not come here immediately. It manifested itself through such things, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly. The whole world stands on it. Before nails, a house was assembled like a puzzle. Logs were dovetailed, boards were pulled together with tenons and grooves. Each knot required time and a precise hand. The nail changed the pace of construction. 1 blow fixes a part, 10 blows assemble a wall. The story began in ancient Rome. There they learned to mass smelt iron and cast fasteners, setting the shape and not cutting it out of wood. But up until the end of the 18th century, nails in Europe were almost always forged by hand. The blacksmith heated a square rod, tapped 4 edges, pulled out the tip, cut a head, and then chopped off the finished blank. Nails differed in length, profile, purpose, from thin roofing nails to short boat nails, and each nail cost as much as a small part-time job. The revolution took place at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century. Machines appeared that cut iron strips into blanks and formed a head in 1 blow. Nails got cheaper and became a mass product. They were no longer counted individually, but in bags. Then came steel using the Bessemer method. Instead of soft forged iron, a strong, homogeneous material. The nail became a standard part for any builder, and a screw stood next to it, where you need to pull it tighter and be able to disassemble it. It sounds simple, but through the nail we can see the development of entire eras. By the shape of the head, archaeologists distinguish the handmade 17th century from the factory-made 19th century. By the rust, they can read old roof repairs, and by the different lengths in one wall, they understand that the house was completed by several generations. And yes, the nail did not cancel the ancient techniques. A good carpenter today will leave a dry tenon where the wood should play without cracks, and will put a nail where speed and rigidity are important. Giant stone sarcophagus. This sarcophagus belonged to the powerful pharaoh Ramesses III, who ruled Egypt during the 20th dynasty. It is a true masterpiece of ancient Egyptian sculpture and ritual art. The enormous stone coffin is covered with carefully engraved symbols and scenes from the Book of the Dead, which were intended to help the pharaoh pass through the afterlife and achieve eternal life. On its side walls are depicted protective goddesses such as Isis and Nephthys, spreading their wings, symbolizing divine patronage and protection. Hieroglyphic inscriptions tell of the exploits of Ramesses III and his connection with the gods. Interestingly, this sarcophagus was reused by the priest-kings of the 21st dynasty, showing how even royal tombs were reused in later eras. Today, this magnificent sarcophagus is kept in the Louvre, where it can be seen by thousands of visitors. 2 sensations on one stone. In the village of Yelabuga in Russia, an amazing archaeological discovery took place. A basalt boulder with petroglyphs reminiscent of the famous Sakhachi-Alyan rock paintings was found. An image of a praying mantis was also found on this stone, which is rare for this region. An expedition of scientists from Moscow arrived in the region to study the find. Initially, archaeologists were skeptical about the report of petroglyphs, but on the spot they confirmed the authenticity of the artifact. Various figures are visualized on the stone, including a rare image of a praying mantis, which is unique in the whole world. Scientists continue to study this area, flying quadcopters to record coordinates and create a digital map of petroglyphs. The main question that remains open is the origin of the boulder with such unique patterns. There are hypotheses that the stone could have arrived with ice drift or been brought in another way. 3D models made from the drawings will allow archaeologists to present to the public exact copies of the Yelabuga finds, confirming their importance and uniqueness. This find not only confirms the rich history of the region, but also opens up new perspectives for the study of ancient civilizations. The first IVF girl. Summer 1978, England. In an ordinary hospital in the city of Oldham, a girl named Louise Brown is born. She looks like an ordinary baby, 2.6 kilograms, strong and screaming loudly. What was unusual was how she appeared. The egg was fertilized not in the mother's body, but in a laboratory dish. Then the tiny embryo was returned to the uterus, and the pregnancy proceeded as with everyone else. Before this, the couple, Leslie and John Brown, had been trying unsuccessfully to have a child for many years. Doctors Robert Edwards and Patrick Steptoe offered them a method that was considered a crazy hope. Take an egg, combine it with a sperm in a sterile environment, and transfer the embryo back. It sounds simple, but back then every detail was on the edge, from the exact time of egg collection to the conditions in the incubator. Any mistake, and nothing will come of it. There was a lot of skepticism. Newspapers wrote about test tube babies, philosophers, religious figures, and politicians argued. Some said, "We are going where we shouldn't." Others believed, "This is a chance for families who would never hear a baby cry in their home." 9 months later, all the arguments died down for a minute. Louise was born healthy. Edwards later received the Nobel Prize. Steptoe did not live to see it, but their work opened the door to millions of families. Then technology developed very quickly. They learned to get more eggs per cycle, grow embryos better, select the most viable ones, and carry out the transfer carefully. Cold storage appeared. Now embryos can be vitrified and used later. For patients, this meant a simple, understandable thing. If the natural way doesn't work, there's a real tool left and not just miracles and prayers. Today, IVF is not a sensation, but a routine procedure in clinics around the world. Yes, it's expensive, yes, it doesn't always work the first time, and yes, ethical discussions have not disappeared. But the fact itself is no longer in dispute. A child conceived in a laboratory is no different from any other. Louise Brown's story is the moment when impossible became normal, and when millions of couples had the opportunity to hear the voice of their long-awaited child. Neolithic Swiss knife. On the border of Germany and Switzerland in the Wangen-Hinterhorn area, archaeologists have found an unusual object, a Neolithic knife with a wooden handle. Length, 7.3 centimeters. Blade, flint. Handle, wood, secured with birch resin, and on the side, a hole for carrying. The whole design resembles something like an ancient multi-tool. And indeed, the find has already been called the first Swiss knife in history. The tool dates back to the Neolithic era, approximately 4,300 to 3,500 years BC. It was found at the site of the Finn culture, a society that lived near swamps and lakes in the territory of today's southern Germany and northern Switzerland. People here built pile houses, farmed, kept cattle, used copper products, and even knew how to use fabric. The knife from Wangen is simple, but it contains the whole essence of the time: convenience, reliability, versatility. This is not a ceremonial object, not a weapon, not an ornament. This is a tool that was used every day, and it is these types of finds that are important. Silver Valkyrie. In the Danish village of Herby, during a routine archaeological survey, a figurine was found. Small, only 3.5 centimeters, made of silver. But it is immediately obvious that it is not accidental. A woman with a sword. In one hand is a round shield, the other is extended downwards. A dress with thin folds, hair pulled into a bun. The face is concentrated. Not a deity, not a decoration, not a toy. She is armed. The find dates back to about 800, and it is the first of its kind found in Scandinavia. Scientists initially decided that this was a mythical Valkyrie, a messenger of the gods, but then other versions began to appear. Maybe this is not a spirit at all, but a person. Viking sagas mention women who fought. They were skalds, warriors, seers. Some burials with weapons actually belonged to women, which is confirmed by DNA analysis. The figurine could have been part of a ritual staff, or a personal talisman, or a picture of a specific woman, one who was respected and feared. In any case, the image of a strong, armed woman in the Viking Age is not fiction. It is reality, simply hidden for a long time under layers of convenient ideas. She says nothing, but her pose, her shield, her sword, they have already said everything. Sometimes it seems like all of this is just facts. Bones, stones, buildings, chemical formulas in the atmosphere of a distant planet. But the longer you watch, the more clearly you understand all of this is about us, about fear, about memory, about loneliness, about what we hide. Archaeology does not tell us what history was. It shows that it was there at all, and each layer has its own face. A box with relics of Polish monarchs. This elegant box with the inscription Izabela Czartoryska is not just an antique but a symbol of Polish history. In 1800, Princess Izabela Czartoryska collected a unique collection of relics related to Polish kings and great historical events in it. In total, the box contained 73 items, from personal belongings of monarchs to fragments of weapons and clothing symbolizing the national heritage and the spirit of resistance. Izabela considered it her mission to preserve Polish identity during the difficult times of partitions. Her box became part of the first museum in Poland, the Temple of Sibyl, created in Puławy, where she invited guests to remind them of the glory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Unfortunately, like many national treasures, the box did not escape a tragic fate. In 1939, during the Nazi invasion of Poland, it was looted, and some relics are still considered lost. Thunderstone. In 1782, the famous monument to Peter the Great, the Bronze Horseman, was erected in St. Petersburg. Much has been written about its creation, but the statue's pedestal, known as the Thunderstone, is a unique engineering achievement in itself. This giant granite monolith was found near St. Petersburg in the village of Konaya Lakhta. Initially, it was 13 meters long, 8 meters high, and 6 meters wide. Its weight reached 2,000 tons. Transporting such a giant in the 18th century without cranes or excavators was an incredible task. It was decided to transport it in winter using frozen soil and ice. The stone was placed on wooden sleds, and copper balls were placed under them, which rolled along specially prepared chutes. Hundreds of workers, using winches and ropes, moved it to the Gulf of Finland. This stage alone took 4 months. The monolith was then loaded onto a barge and delivered to St. Petersburg. However, during transportation and subsequent processing, it significantly decreased in size. Out of 2,000 tons, 1,200 tons remained. Thunderstone is the largest monolith in history that was moved manually. Even the ancient blocks of Baalbek remained in place, and this granite giant became part of one of the most recognizable monuments in Russia. Ancient metropolis in Serbia. In the area of the Thutmose River in Vojvodina, Serbia, archaeologists have discovered the remains of an ancient settlement covering an area of 13 hectares. This Neolithic city was surrounded by protective ditches, indicating its importance and scale. The work was carried out jointly by specialists from various European scientific institutes who used the latest equipment for geophysical research. These studies helped reveal the existence of a previously unknown metropolis that existed here about 7,000 years ago. Artifacts discovered indicate that the settlement was associated with the Vinca culture, ancient inhabitants of southeastern Europe who lived there between 5,400 and 4,500 BC. The size and structure of the settlement are impressive, and geophysical data show its structure in detail. The metropolis probably suffered from a major fire which left behind many burnt houses. This could have been the result of a raid or disaster, after which the settlement was abandoned. In addition, the evidence found suggests the presence of at least 4 defensive ditches, indicating a high risk of attack at that time. 2,500-year-old helmet and Dacian treasures. This golden helmet is one of the most famous artifacts of the Dacian culture, dating back to around 450 BC. Known as the Kotofanesti helmet, it is considered not only a work of ancient jewelry but also a symbol of power and ritual strength. Decorated with eyes, snakes, and mythological scenes, it may have belonged to a priest or chieftain who played a sacred role in Dacian society. The helmet seems to look at enemies, instilling fear and protecting the owner. On January 25, 2025, this helmet became the victim of a daring robbery. Several unique exhibits were stolen from the Drenthe Museum in Assen, Netherlands, where the exhibition Dacia, Land of Gold and Silver was taking place. Among them were this helmet and 3 royal Dacian bracelets. All the items came from the National History Museum of Romania. The loss of these artifacts was a real blow to the cultural heritage. The mysterious harpy. The Queen of the Night relief, created around 1800 BC, is one of the most enigmatic artifacts of Mesopotamia. Also known as the Burney relief, it depicts a winged goddess with bird claws instead of feet, standing on the backs of 2 lions. On either side of her are owls, symbolizing power over the darkness of the night and the spirit world. The identity of the depicted goddess remains a subject of debate. Some researchers believe that this is Ishtar, Inanna, the Babylonian goddess of love, war, and fertility. Others suggest that the relief depicts Ereshkigal, the dark mistress of the underworld, Ishtar's sister. The symbolism of the relief indicates the power and supernatural strength of the goddess. The relief was probably a cult object associated with religious rituals or magical practices. Its rich detail and monumentality speak to the importance of the depicted deity and the beliefs of the era. Today, this artifact is kept in the British Museum. Mother is more important than food. In the 1950s and 60s, psychologist Harry Harlow placed baby rhesus monkeys in cages with two mothers. One was made of a bare wire frame but with a bottle of milk. The second was soft, covered with fabric, without food. It would seem that the choice is obvious. Where there is food, there is love. But the babies spent almost all their time on the soft mother and only approached the wire one to eat and immediately returned to the fabric. This means that the basic need is not only calories but also contact, warmth, support. Next comes the fear test. A frightening object was placed in the cage. The baby first snuggled up to the soft mother and then, having calmed down, began to explore the room. This is very similar to how a child behaves. First the base, then curiosity. When there was no soft mother, the babies froze, squealed, hid in the corner, and hardly explored the space. The harshest thing in this story is the long-term consequences of contact deprivation. Monkeys who grew up without a real mother and without playing with peers became withdrawn, communicated poorly, and their parental behavior collapsed. It turned out later that some of the problems could be mitigated if such babies were given a lot of live contact and care, but traces of the lack of warmth at an early age still remained. The experiment influenced the approach to orphanages, maternity hospitals, and neonatal intensive care units. Physical contact is not pampering, but a necessity. Hence the kangaroo method in neonatology, the joint stay of mother and child, attention to tactile support. And in scientific ethics, after Harlow, they began to look much more harshly at experiments with animals. The price of knowledge should not break a living creature without extreme necessity. The lost branch of humans. Human remains dating back about 6,000 years were found on a high plateau near Bogotá. Ancient DNA was carefully extracted from teeth and dense bones, purified of impurities, and compared with large databases. There were no matches with modern peoples. The genetic imprint stands separately. This means that an independent group of hunter-gatherers lived in those places, which eventually disappeared from today's picture, either dissolved without a trace or broke off. Small groups are vulnerable to any changes. The climate and prey change, neighbors arrive, diseases or migrations begin. Over several centuries, the original portrait is easily lost. In such cases, ancient bones retain a trace, but it is no longer legible among living descendants. It is important to stick to the facts. This is not another race or a sensation for the sake of a headline. The point is that the flow of migrations went along different paths and with different endings. To understand the fate of this line more precisely, new samples from the same layers and neighboring areas are needed. Perhaps further in time, distant kinship will be discovered. Today, one thing is clear. Not every human branch has survived to this day. Here we manage to see traces of people who no longer exist as a separate group. Eternal memory in glass. Imagine a thin plate of quartz glass. A laser places tiny marks inside it, like dots, only in volume. These marks can be rotated and made stronger, weaker, so a lot of information fits into one plate. Roughly speaking, this is not one flat track, like on a disk, but a whole multi-layered archive inside the glass. The main feature is durability. Glass does not rust, is not afraid of water, magnets, and time. Calculations and tests show that such a carrier can survive heat, humidity, and be stored for an incredibly long time. This is not a flash drive for every day, but an eternal cold archive. Write it down and forget about it for years and tens of thousands of years. In essence, everything is simple. The laser writes information inside. When reading, the glass is illuminated, the camera catches the pattern of marks, the software restores the originals. This works not only for documents, video also goes to the glass and is read back. The main benefit is hassle-free storage. The plate sits on the shelf for years and can be read at any time. convenient for family archives, film libraries, and time capsules. Women with no scent. In the northwest of Namibia, there lives an amazing tribe called the Himba. Its women never wash with water, but despite this, they look well-groomed and have no unpleasant odor. How is this possible in the semi-desert conditions where water is considered an incredible luxury? The Himba tribe arose about 500 years ago when part of the Herero people moved across the Kunene River to the territory of modern Namibia. The main occupation of the Himba has always been cattle breeding, and the life of people completely depends on cows and goats. Even houses around settlements are built in the shape of a circle to protect livestock. Due to the lack of water, Himba women are taught from childhood to save it and not use it to wash their bodies. Instead, they have a special mixture called otjizi. It is prepared from animal fat, red ochre, and local plants. Women apply it to their skin and hair every day, thanks to which they acquire the famous terracotta hue. The otjizi mixture protects from the sun, retains moisture, and has antibacterial properties, preventing the appearance of an unpleasant odor. In addition, instead of traditional washing, women use smoke baths. They sit over smoldering coals with comifera, myrrh, wood resin, and other aromatic herbs that cleanse the body and kill bacteria. The Himba have their own beauty canons. Reddish skin symbolizes strength and health, and hairstyles with many braids and decorations show the social status of a woman, her age, and marital status. Today, the traditional Himba way of life is gradually disappearing. Young people are increasingly going to the cities, and traditions are forgotten. But you can still meet women who keep the ancient secrets of hygiene and beauty of their amazing people. An ancient toy for adults. The artifact, which is already more than 2,000 years old, was found in Great Britain back in 1992. Initially, archaeologists assumed that this wooden object was used as a sewing tool. However, further study suggested that it could be an ancient sexual device. Most scientists agree that the wooden object found is in the shape of a phallus. The uniqueness of this artifact is that it has not changed its shape and method of use even after thousands of years. And the most interesting thing is that its shape will not change in the future for obvious reasons. However, there are several versions regarding the use of this artifact. As a sex toy. Based on Roman images, it is known that they had dildos, but they rarely came down to us because they were most often made from organic materials. Also, some archaeologists suggest that slave owners could use such an object to inflict pain and demonstrate power over slaves. Others believe it could have been a good luck charm. Indeed, in ancient times, amulets of this shape were very common. As a final option, it could be used as a mortar for grinding or mixing spices and other materials used for culinary or medicinal purposes. Artificial brain plays. Tennis. A culture of neurons was grown in a lab and hooked up to an old game of Pong. On the table is not a computer, but a flat matrix of electrodes with a carpet of living cells, about 800,000 human and mouse neurons. The electrodes on the right and left tell the network where the ball is and how close it is to the racket. Other electrodes receive the answer, up or down. When the ball flies past, the network receives an unpleasant, chaotic signal. When it hits, a short, predictable stimulus comes. So the neurons are given a simple goal, to reduce chaos and hit more often. After a few minutes, the culture begins to behave better than a random player. This is not a miracle intelligence or a brain in a jar that understands the rules. The network simply learns to recognize recurring situations and give an appropriate response. There are many errors, but there are noticeably more hits than with random movements. The practical meaning here is that this is a controlled stand. It immediately shows how the substance changes the behavior of neurons. Give a drop, and by the number of hits, response time, and signal stability, it is clear whether it has become better or worse. The same with toxins, alcohol, nicotine, anesthetics. The effect does not have to be guessed. It is displayed on a graph in minutes. The same stand is suitable for fine-tuning of prostheses and neurointerfaces. Living tissue reacts to noise and delays differently than a model on a computer, and this can be caught in real time. This is not consciousness and not a brain in a jar. There are no feelings or I here. There is a layer of neurons on a matrix of electrodes which learns one trick from signals, to move a racket. The value is in control. You can complicate the rules, add inputs, change the reward, and measure the result every second. Accuracy, speed, stability. Then, not a pixel on the screen, but a real object. The same network moves a small motor or stabilizes an LED by a signal. You can also grow cells from a specific person and calmly see which drugs actually improve their function. All these stories can be verified. That's their strength. Write what discoveries we should analyze next, and I'll put together a new episode of things that change the idea of what's possible. Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.